all assets are going to fluctuate over time because it's a zero-sum game. So when you see the short term above water and the long term well above water here at plus 22%, it's a sign that we might be a little bit overheated still. Doesn't mean markets can't bounce from here and go back up to 120 or even 125K for a new all-time high.
Hey everybody, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. Today we're going to break down the data in the crypto market about what's happening with Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and much more. And of course, joining me is Brian from Santiment, and we're going to go through all the metrics. Brian, great to see you.
Great to see you, Tony. A couple of weeks of fading in the crypto markets now, ever since the July 14th 123K plus all-time high that we had. So I think a lot of people are starting to look at dip buy opportunities. We're seeing some evidence of that, and some increased focus on Ethereum, of course.
Yeah, Bitcoin hitting 123K, and then ETH really started rallying, XRP as well. And now we're seeing a bit of a cool down. I look at the charts and I see things that are in the overbought zones or natural healthy pullback. And then, of course, this week you got the FOMC tomorrow, actually. And, things are going to get a bit, anytime there's some sort of FOMC meeting, there's a lot of volatility. So I'm curious, maybe we could start with Bitcoin, what things are looking like there.
Yeah, especially around FOMC time. I think there's been a bit of an effect of traders sitting on their hands a bit. We're definitely seeing evidence of many people buying dips right now, or at least discussing the prospect of buying dips. You can see the social dominance of buy, buying, or bought related to words related to dip or dips and anything to do with crypto, or at least Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, or altcoins in general, just to keep it easy. And we see this is actually the highest social dominance we've seen in over a month right now. We had to go back to early May, the last time we saw something of this magnitude in terms of dip buy discussions. So people are considering this a dip buy opportunity. If you look at the grand scheme of things in terms of prices, it's not all that much of a dip. But when you have so many people pouring into crypto 2 weeks ago, when they hear on whatever their news source is that Bitcoin just crossed above 123K, of course you're going to get a whole bunch of new people coming in, and from their perspective, this is a big dip. We're back down in that 115 to 117K range. So naturally, people want to find ways to add on and try to get their portfolios back in positive range. And I think this is a pretty good sign that people see it as a potential bounce back opportunity. I will say that dip buys or dips in general are usually most advised when the crowd isn't talking about it. So this may be a sign that it isn't time just yet, even though the retail crowd is excited about the opportunity to buy low relative to a couple weeks ago. You may want to wait until there's a bit more fear in the air, because as we've talked about, Tony, markets typically go the opposite direction of the crowd's expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the regular charts, I'm seeing, once again, these assets in the overbought zone. And anytime we're there, we go the opposite direction. So I think it would be great to look at the MVRV and what story that's telling.
Yeah, let's check out MVRV here really quick and see what's going on. While I was here, I was just looking at sentiment, and it looks about average, about 1.25 to 1.3 bullish comments for every one bearish comment. That's about on par for what we've seen on average throughout 2025 for Bitcoin. So people are kind of sitting on their hands. I think the FOMC decision tomorrow has a lot to do with it, where it seems as though the consensus is that nothing will change regarding interest rates. But, surprises have happened before. So people are probably being slightly cautious, if not a bit optimistic, with what we saw with the dip buy opportunity conversations going on. Now, in terms of MVRV, 30-day traders are up an average of 1.8%, which is just a smidge over even. Even is, of course, where all assets are going to fluctuate over time because it's a zero-sum game. So when you see the short term above water and the long term well above water here at plus 22%, it's a sign that we might be a little bit overheated still. Doesn't mean markets can't bounce from here and go back up to 120 or even 125K for a new all-time high, but it means it would be doing it in spite of the average traders already being up considerably. Generally, you see the biggest dip buys or the biggest bounces, I should say, when the MVRVs are well below zero, especially both the short, which is in orange, and the long, which is in teal, are both below 0%. And we last saw that in early April with Trump's tariffs and stuff. So ideally, we'd want to at least see one of these lines get below 0%. For now, slightly risky if you're going to add on to your position or buy more, but certainly not out of the question for markets to continue surging, especially if some surprise happens with the FOMC decision.
Yeah. Like you said, we would love to see that below zero. And maybe the catalyst is the news tomorrow from Jerome Powell that even though the market's expecting not really a cut, but maybe they don't, it's that negative news. Well, here we go again. Jerome, they're not cutting. And then you had the kind of the political show between him and Trump and all that stuff.
Right. And, Powell isn't paying nearly as much attention to crypto as we are on this show. He's focused more on the S&P 500 and the overall economic conditions and employment rates and overall inflation rates, things like that. So he's looking predominantly at this line much more than the other two. And the S&P 500 is continuing to just thrive right now. It hasn't had any massive breakout days over really the course of July, but it's steadily just chipped up 0.3 to 0.5% increases every single day. And over time, that's just creating more and more all-time highs here. We're closing in on a $6,400 S&P 500 now for the first time ever. So this is a pretty big deal. And it's really showing that the overall S&P 500 and stock markets, not just in the US, but throughout the world, are continuing to grow right now. For the most part. So if anything, this isn't typically what they look for when they want to cut interest rates. They usually do it, after what we saw in 2022, which was a bloodbath because I think, overcompensated for COVID in the couple of years prior. So eventually they had to allow for interest rates to be cut again. And that's what happened. So they saw this and they finally started to cut rates pretty significantly in the second half of 2022. But we're doing, mostly this kind of increase throughout the stock market right now. And that's usually not when they're going to cut.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I guess we'll see how it plays out. And, I think tomorrow is going to be a very volatile day. Folks who are going to be watching this, going to see it on the day of course, on Wednesday. What are the whales doing? I'm curious about, are they continuing to accumulate?
Yeah, so we like to take a look at the wallets holding between 10 to 10,000 Bitcoin. It's a very large sample. This group makes up about 2/3 of the supply held throughout Bitcoin. Since late April, they had been accumulating pretty rapidly. Up until July 15th, they added up about 147,000 more Bitcoin accumulated. Since that time, over the past 2 weeks or so, they have dropped about 16.5K Bitcoin. So they've given a bit back. They're certainly not aggressively dumping by any means, but they are moving downwards with their collective holdings, which is not the most encouraging sign to justify continued rises in Bitcoin's price.
And that makes sense because Bitcoin just hit a new all-time high over the past couple of weeks at 123K. So it makes sense that some of them would take profits, especially if they bought in that tariff crash. You bought like 70K. Right. This is not a bad exit. And then I don't know if you saw the news, but a Satoshi era wallet investor or holder of Bitcoin, they had 80,000 Bitcoin they sold via Galaxy Digital in small increments, but they exited the market. And that's a lot of Bitcoin. So it's a price point where, you can't blame people for taking profits.
Exactly. Since early April, which was now almost 4 months ago when Trump came out with the big poster board showing the tariff rates he would be imposing on each country, we went on just this massive run, and it almost felt like it would never end because it was happening in spite of, the Iran and Israel and US conflict. and all of these other factors that you would think were going to negatively impact markets, and they didn't. So I think people got this feeling of almost an immunity, like no matter what's in the news, we're just going to see prices continue to rise. And of course, eventually that turns out not to be true, and people get caught holding the bag. We haven't seen any sort of crazy dump by any means, unless you're in some volatile meme coins that have fallen off the face of the earth. But for the most part, crypto has done just fine since, but we are starting to see signs of a little fading. Doesn't mean it can't turn around, but just based on the information we know, it's a little concerning. And regarding that big transfer, I don't know if it's the same as this one on July 16th, but our top token transaction table does show just this massive transfer on this particular day that may align with that one. It was almost 2 weeks ago now. So compared to any other transfer, the next biggest was just 16.5K, which is still more money than any of us could ever imagine. And you see a ton here around the 10,000 Bitcoin mark. But yeah, 77K is one of the biggest we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, that's huge. So, this is certainly a signal I've been telling people that we have to watch in addition to others, because if the whales are starting to exit the market and this number starts to go into a downtrend, it may be signs that, look, the top is coming soon.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to be a little more cautious when we see these mega whale transfers and just the collective holdings moving down the way that they have.
Man, I don't know. I can't talk today, Brian.
It's all good.
What about ETF inflows? What are those looking like?
So in terms of ETF inflows, it's still looking pretty good. So we had a few minor down days here at the end of last week, but it's starting to turn around, and we've seen 3 straight inflow days once again. Overall, I mean, going back to early June, especially right around the second week, that's when we just started this huge surge of money inflowing into all of these Bitcoin ETFs. Several billions of dollars collectively were moved in when accounting for all of the net inflows and outflows on these ETFs. So it's been a good sign overall. I'm not really too worried about these 3 small outflows. You can see times when there were much more concerning ones, like here in late May, that did affect Bitcoin's price. Oftentimes, I mean, the reason we look at these ETF inflows and outflows is because they'll often mimic what on-chain whales are doing. Sure. Institutionals have their hands in both at the same time. So this is more of just like a transparent reflection of how these huge institutionals are treating Bitcoin. And for the most part, the trend, at least for the past 3 months, going back to the tariff easing or tariff pausing, whatever you'd like to call it, it's been overwhelmingly full of inflows. And I haven't seen that pattern really show signs of stopping yet.
Yeah, I've been watching some other charts too, showing BlackRock specifically, like they've been buying at such a record pace. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, here's BlackRock, by the way. So we have that data. It's exactly what people are talking about. Almost all inflows outside of a few big drops in late May, early June. But yeah, I mean, roughly just eyeballing this, it looks like something around 45 to 50 inflow days and just 3 outflow days. It's a pretty good ratio if you're a believer in following the smart money.
Yeah. Let's look at Ethereum. Obviously been showing tons of strength lately, rallying and kind of leading the altcoin market. I'm hoping that it can break 4,000 fairly soon, maybe sometime in August. But what are you seeing there from a sentiment as well as holders and MVRV and so forth?
Yeah, while we're here, I'm just going to take a look at the amount of Ethereum held by wallets with at least 10,000 ETH. And they've been looking really strong, especially since about 3-ish weeks ago. Their percentage of the supply held, they've added about 0.5% of the entire supply, which is a ton, to their wallets. That's coming from retail, by the way. They're not just minting and mining it all. It's coming from retail selling and taking profits during this time. And if you look at it from like just an absolute number perspective, they were holding, let's go back 3 months. They were holding about 114.8 million. 3 months ago, they're holding 118.66 million now. They've added roughly 3.87 million more Ethereum to their collective wallets, when just accounting for all wallets holding at least 10,000 Ethereum, which is in the tens of millions, I believe, or hundreds of millions. I'm trying to do the old 5th grade math trick that we had with the adding zeros, but you get the idea. These are definitely whales, definitely huge wallets that are, for the most part, continuing to rise in their collective holdings.
And what we've seen recently is a bunch of Ethereum treasury companies have come on the scene. Sharplink specifically partnering with the ETH Foundation and Joe Lubin. I think just this morning to get some updated numbers, they've been buying at a record pace. So it seems like the Ethereum treasury strategy trend is growing, narrative as well. So seeing a lot of demand for ETH.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Lubin. So I did a quick check the other day on just the overall mentions of, Saylor mentioned with Ethereum versus Lubin mentioned with Ethereum. And put them on a shared axis here. Saylor still gets a little more attention related to his overall investments because he's just so transparent and vocal about what they're doing. But yeah, you can see plenty of talk about Lubin, especially right here on, what was that, yesterday. So it's starting to heat up, the Lubin talks with Ethereum investing a little bit more. So that's going to be an interesting trend to watch as well.
What's the MVRV look like for ETH?
Here is where Ethereum stands. And it's, as you'd expect with Ethereum's rally going back the last couple of months, much higher than Bitcoin, because Ethereum's overall price is still roughly up about something like 69% in the past 5 weeks or so, give or take 70%. So MVRV wise, short term average wallets are up about 14%. That's just short of the danger zone that we usually, kind of roughly ballpark at about plus 15%. So they were in this danger zone for quite a while. And you can see it tried to make one final higher high here, and it did. And then it kind of started to fade a little, but it's still sitting in a comfortable place just below $3,800. I would just be a little bit concerned about, the 30-day MVRV being that high, and then the long-term MVRV at about plus 36.5%. So this is what we'd call a bit of a danger zone. Doesn't mean the price is going to fall off a cliff, but it increases the probability of us needing a cool down period for Ethereum due to all of the profiting that we've seen the last couple of months. Yeah,
that absolutely makes sense. ETH has been rallying really strong, being a leader in the altcoin space. And, it's kind of the rotational liquidity. So Bitcoin topped, right? I shouldn't say top, but it, hit kind of a local top with 123K. It cooled down. Then we saw these altcoins start taking off. But then usually what happens, the liquidity has to go back to Bitcoin for the next leg up. So it could be that ETH and these other altcoins start to drain out a bit, as far as liquidity, they go down and retest support levels while Bitcoin steals the show again.
Yep. I think that's a great way of looking at it.
How about XRP? What are you seeing on that front?
All right, so XRP's MVRV, let's see what comes up here. So kind of a tale of two different time frames. On the 30-day side, we're at about plus 8.7, which does suggest there's some risk right now, not to the level of Ethereum's, but it's still high. From the 365-day, though, it's even higher than Ethereum's. Not quite at the level it was in the middle of July when it was just soaring to nearly $4, but it did retrace, and that brought the MVRVs back down a little. I'm still pretty cautious, though. Plus 45% on the long term is quite high. Plus almost 9% on the 30-day is also quite high for their respective ranges. Doesn't mean XRP can't continue to thrive. We're believers of XRP at Santiment, but we want to at least wait for nice setups in theory before jumping in. And, even going back to early July when things were down here more, or especially in negative range, like we saw in late June, when people were starting to write off XRP and we actually went below $2, those are the ideal times to buy. Not just because it went under $2 and that's a low number, but because the average wallets are in deficit during this time, whereas they're in profit. And the peers and the people you're trading against, you're not all on the same team, they're the ones who have already profited significantly when it's supposed to be and will be forever a zero-sum game.
Interesting. And then as far as sentiment, what are you seeing on that front?
For XRP, looking at the positive versus negative commentary ratio. Interestingly, so we were quite low. A lot of negativity during this retrace period over the past week, but it just started to bounce up again. It looks like people might be starting to consider a dip buy opportunity now that we've fallen from whatever. It looks like 8 days ago we were 364-ish, now down to 313. So we've dropped roughly 14% in price, and that's been enough for people to kind of change their tune and decide, okay, now's the time we can jump back in.
That makes sense. How about we jump to Solana?
Sure. On the Solana side, in terms of sentiment, very low. In fact, it's probably the lowest we've seen all year long, which is quite surprising. It's a small sample. We're not done with the day, but based on the amount of comments we've had, we last saw a very short-term drop in sentiment during the tariffs, but that was about it. Normally, Solana is getting at least 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 bullish versus bearish comments across social media, and considering it's below 2, suggests the FUD is really starting to kick in, which is actually a good sign. If you're a counter trader, like we suggest so many people should be, if you're going against the narratives, you tend to make money much more efficiently. So a lot of people are likely selling here or giving up on Solana after its mild dip from a little over 200. It's dropped almost 11% since then. So that's been enough to really scare a lot of people away. Could be a good sign that you can dip by with confidence now.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And also, with the recent weeks with ETH running, XRP, BNB and stuff like that, it's not related to meme coins, and meme coins have been a lot of kind of the activity and the sentiment behind Solana. So like when meme coins are going crazy, it feels like Solana's pulled with it, and there hasn't been much of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because BNB, which we haven't talked about, made its new all-time high, getting above $850. And because it's a native token related to the largest exchange in the world, Binance, it doesn't get the same traction as Solana, Ethereum, even Chainlink, Cardano, a lot of these other top cap assets. But it is, the 5th largest market cap in crypto right now. And it's been on such a huge run. I'm surprised there hasn't been a little more FOMO to it, but I do see it in conversations with Solana quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. What about SUI? Because that one has been performing well. Seems to be big narratives around it as well.
Yeah, SUI's been on more of a quiet run. I'm sure some of you track SUI closely, but it's kind of been overshadowed by a lot of what Ethereum and XRP have done as of late. But you can see that it topped out at around 440, maybe just under that, and has retraced, about 12%, pretty similar to XRP and Solana. Its sentiment hasn't really done anything special, though. It was pretty high here. I mean, some of these spikes, they look just like the other spikes we've looked at, but if we look at the top left of my screen where it says positive versus negative sentiment, that's a 7.21. That means when people do talk about SUI, it's a little over 7 bullish comments per every 1 bearish comment. That's massive. So SUI's one, perhaps due to being lesser known, like people only talk about it when it's on a run of some sort, and they tend to ignore it when it's not. You can see right here, it was just almost not talked about from the 17th to 24th that week. So that's what happens when it actually goes down. And then all of a sudden SUI goes up and everyone says, hey, look, told you SUI's an amazing investment. And you get all these very polarizing, I guess more so just euphoric comments when things are going good and absent comments when things aren't.
Yeah, I can certainly attest to that, anecdotally on social media. I only hear about it when the price is rolling, and then you get the SUI investors come out and they start posting. So yeah.
Yeah.
What about stable coins? Obviously we've tracked in the past Tether dominance and things like that. A lot of liquidity comes in, and I think over the past week or so, Tether minted like over 3 billion USDT on whale tracker on X.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those are going into whale wallets, as I would assume is usually the case. The overall supply on exchanges has continued its long-term drop, which isn't the end of the world. I don't think that you need to have just a massive amount of Tether on exchanges to justify, that buys are going to happen. There's still 43% of all Tether on exchanges. And keep in mind, when new Tether's minted, and it's minted in these cold wallets, that's just going to, by default, push the percent of supply down over time. And you can see here the total supply held by whales with at least $5 million. This is kind of a specific metric that our team put together. It's been flying off the charts over the past 5 weeks. So here we were at just below 50%, and now a little over 56.5% of the total supply held by whales with more than $5 million is held there. So I think that's a sign that the rich are kind of getting richer, and obviously more coins are being minted. I think we can look at just overall supply too. Yeah, total supply here, which could be interesting. Yeah, just as you suggested, Tony, I mean, you can see here definitely a lot of minting going on. It went up to about 83.24 billion after 2 weeks ago being at 78.2. So the total supply has gone up almost 6.5% in 10 days.
Yep.
Crazy.
It feels like there's a loading up here from whales to then push it into the market. And then from the larger time frame, I'm assuming that, look, the supply is supposed to go down on exchanges if it's being moved into the assets and the asset prices are appreciating, right? The inverse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It makes sense mathematically that's how it usually goes. Yeah, USDC looked similar too. I was just doing a quick check on that. So yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of stable coins out there right now. I know some people have a little distrust in, more stable coins just being printed at the company's whims, but for now they seem to be useful tools for the vast community to be able to make exchanges and swap coins effectively. It's been that way since Tether came out in 2017.
Yeah, and then I know there's been FUD going around for years. Like I see if anytime Tether mints, they're like, oh, they just printed out of thin air, right? That's the kind of meme FUD going on. But we have institutions now that have validated that Tether, maybe in the back in the day, was not fully reserved, but now, Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick, which is part of the Trump administration, came out and said just last year they have the money. We've done the review. And then Tether CEO, he's been on TV saying they're currently partnering with a top 4 accounting firm to go do that too, so they can give an official report. And I feel like with stablecoin legislation in place, nobody can play games anymore because they're going to get busted big time. That's
a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, I hope in another 2 weeks we're talking, the market has bottomed out. Bitcoin's headed to 130K plus, and things are looking on the upside.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 24 hours going into tomorrow's decision by the FOMC. But, overall, we've got an administration that's behind crypto here in the US. We have plenty of institutions that are still holding tight. They may not be as high as they were 2 weeks ago, but they're not exactly dumping right now. It's mostly just a little bit of a calm before the next storm. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys agree with this or, you're looking at it, but it feels like the blow off top may happen sometime later this year, maybe late Q3, early Q4. Obviously we'll have to look at the data, like the whale accumulation, and if those signals are flashing.
Yeah, and the blow off top is not inevitable. Some people think, oh, it's going to happen sometime this year. We better prepare. But we just have to remember the more the crowd expects the blow off top, the less likely it is to occur.
Sure. Brian, great stuff. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks. And like I said, fingers crossed that we're headed to new highs.
Absolutely, my friend. Looking forward to the next talk.